Good afternoon. I'm Sandy Hunt, Managing Director of the Wharton Social Impact Initiative, and I'm delighted to welcome you to our conversation today with C.B. Bhattacharya. C.B. is the H.J. Zoffer Chair of Sustainability and Ethics at the University of Pittsburgh's Katz Graduate School of Business and the author of the great new book, Small Actions, Big Difference. Welcome to Wharton, C.B.
Thank you for having me.
So you have a rich career in this space. Tell us a little bit about how you got interested in this topic.
Well, I'm actually back at my alma mater, so my PhD was from Wharton, and it was in marketing, which doesn't have a direct link to what I do today. But as I was an assistant professor back in the day at Emory University, during that time, I met a gentleman by the name of Ben Cohen, and he was the CEO of this company called Ben & Jerry's. So he was the Ben of Ben & Jerry's. And he asked me kind of an interesting question. He said, we do a lot for the environment and we do a lot for society. Can you help me understand if what we do for the environment and for society, does it help us sell ice cream? And I found that to be a fascinating question. And this is the mid-1990s, mind you. I found it a fascinating question on multiple fronts. First, he was talking about sales and how to increase sales. And as marketing people, we are always talking about how to increase sales. On the other hand, he was talking about environmental attributes and social attributes of a product kind of driving sales. And nobody was looking at that point in time. And so I said, okay, I don't know the answer to this question, but I'm going to, think about it. And so that really started my transition to the field of what we now call corporate social responsibility or CSR, and that proved to be kind of the turning point for my career. And then one thing led to another. There were several articles to be written, several questions to be explored, and I started down that path. And as I was researching for my last book, Leveraging Corporate Responsibility, I made an interesting observation, and the observation was that these corporate responsibility managers or sustainability managers in companies like P&G, General Mills, Timberland, I researched all these companies. They were all very smart, very good people, but they were kind of lonely. And what I mean by that is that they did not have a seat at the strategy table of the company. And to me, this struck as odd and not something good for the field, because in my research, I'd found that it's only when CSR is treated as a strategy, only then does it benefit the firm and benefit society and so on and so forth. So I started thinking about the next book, which now comes out as Small Actions, Big Difference. How can we, onboard the entire organization into this journey of making our companies more sustainable? So that, in short, is kind of how I get here.
Excellent. And before we go into the solutions the book outlines, let's talk about the problem. You say this isn't working at companies for two reasons. One is that bosses delegate the task to a single unit rather than integrating it throughout the entire corporate strategy. And two is that boards believe unsustainable practices can be solved by a change in management. Let's talk about how those show up and really illustrate those problems. What does it look like in the first case? How would you know, gosh, that's my company, we need to change?
Right. So there is this mistaken conception in the field, in large parts of the corporate field, I would say, that sustainability, the well-being of our planet and its people, is the next iteration of CSR, or corporate social responsibility. In fact, I'm going to India next week to speak at a conference which is called CSR 3.0. So it's like, goes higher and higher. Now, this is wrong, because sustainability has to do with the survival of the company. And as such, it deals with every organizational function, starting from procurement, where do our raw materials come from, to disposal, kind of where do our products kind of end up. And as you can imagine, every part of the organization is touched by the concept and actions that have to do with sustainability. So,
More of a lens over the entire company.
Yeah, so that's why I call conducting business through the sustainability lens. So everybody has to be onboarded, and just relegating it to one unit so that you produce a sustainability report in which you just kind of note what all you've done as a company and showing yourself as a good corporate citizen is necessary but nearly not sufficient.
So when a company is doing it right, is there someone in each division or sector that is sort of a part of the sustainability team? How do you make sure it's not siloed?
Yes, that happens. First of all, oftentimes there are no sustainability teams as such because sustainability is fully integrated into product development, into R&D, into branding, into human resource management, into procurement, all of that. And any team that you will find has what's called sustainability generalists, multiple people working in that who may not have a very deep knowledge of the science of sustainability or whatever, but who know enough so as to make those business decisions with that lens of sustainability.
It's a priority, and they're making sure that it shows up.
That it's always integrated into every business decision made from the mailroom to the boardroom. That's how it happens in certain companies. In other companies, you're absolutely right. I mean, there will be somebody from marketing, somebody from HR, somebody from procurement, and they will be kind of the ambassadors, if you will, to the overall kind of corporate sustainability leadership team. And then they, in turn, kind of cascade stuff through their respective departments. So I have seen both of those happening.
So that's the first way you
Right.
see it not working, and a little bit on the solution. The second challenge you raise is that it's not about a change in management or change management. It's really about changing how a company philosophically thinks about sustainability. Tell me more.
In our field, in the corporate world, we have this belief that change management can pretty much fix everything. Sure. So the lean manufacturing, change management, quality movement.
I started my
change
career
management.
in consulting. Very familiar. Yes.
And that's the bread and butter
Yep.
of consultants. So I have seen several organizations who will say, well, we can get in a McKinsey or an Accenture to kind of, launch our sustainability program.
Yep.
That's all very good, except sustainability speaks to the very philosophy of business and to the philosophy of the corporation. And change management does not do that. So traditional change management initiatives are still focused on how to increase profit. Whereas when it comes to sustainability, the first thing we're saying is that we have to go beyond profit to think about purpose. What is the purpose of the organization? And the purpose of the organization really is to play a role in society and to be helpful towards the environment, to serve customers. So it's a multi-stakeholder kind of a concept. And as you know, the Business Roundtable recently came out and said that, we need to go beyond profits. Larry Fink has been writing his letters and so on. So it's when we think that, a change management exercise can fix sustainability. Again, I think we are kind of ignoring some very important underpinnings of the concept, particularly when it comes to kind of convincing your employee bases that this is something worthwhile kind of engaging in rather than kind of being bystanders. So rather than change in management, I would just cut out the in. It was more about kind of thinking that change management is going to be able to fix it, and that's wrong. It won't.
Excellent. For companies that don't have the expertise in-house, you're speaking to why bringing someone in from the outside may not be the solution. What would your advice be if they were looking in to bring in insight or some valuable perspectives about how to be a more sustainable company?
Yeah. So I'm not saying don't bring someone from the outside. I mean, if you don't know what to do, of course, you need help. And there are, commercial consulting organizations. There are also people like myself and others who work in the field who might be able to help. So that's all fine and good. But I think what is important is for whoever kind of comes in to help to understand this concept of kind of it's just different from, it's somewhat, sustainability is a different kind of an animal, and let's try to understand kind of, go take a step back and see why business exists in the first place. And why is that important? That's really important because if we don't ask that question, why do we do what we do as an energy company? I mean, my job literally is not to sell electricity, but it is to keep people comfortably warm or cold or help them do whatever they want to do with electricity. And that's a huge mindset shift. And when you define your purpose, any company, they will always find that sustainability kind of is inherently built into that definition. And so anyone who comes in to help you out, help any company out, as long as they have the right kind of perspective on what sustainability entails and what it would take to change an organization to transition its business model to be more sustainable, I think we're fine.
Excellent. Let's get into the solutions, because I bet viewers are watching this and saying, gosh, this seems like a hard nut to crack. So your book outlines 3 steps. Can you summarize them for us?
Sure. So the 3 steps are incubate, where by and large it's the leadership team and who gets together to define that all-important purpose that I talked about. What's the company's purpose? And then they come up with a set of concrete goals, so the issues that are material for their company, because a cement company could be very different from kind of a consulting company or a financial services company or what have you. So everybody doesn't have to solve all the problems in the world. So the second phase is launch, and that's when we kind of unfold that program for the employee base of the company and potentially other stakeholders as well, like community members, supply chain members, even customers, and so on. And the third phase is called entrench, where you undertake a set of practices that makes acting sustainably or doing business through that lens of sustainability kind of like second nature, And there we talk about kind of providing feedback on progress, through metrics and KPIs. We talk about creating a vibrant culture of sustainability in the organization so that it's kept fresh and it doesn't become another flavor of the month. And then I talk about expanding your sense of kind of ownership so that it's not just about me anymore, my company, but it's about the planet. And that's where we see traditional competitors collaborating to solve what I call the tragedy of the commons problems, like kind of deforestation or e-waste that no one company can solve by itself. So those incubate, launch, and entrench are the 3 steps of my model.
Excellent. Well, let's dig in a little bit. On the incubation step, you're setting that mission, that purpose. Is that unique for each company, or do you see companies within a particular sector all sort of having the same mission and purpose? I'm asking as I think about leaders who are going to watch this interview, read your book, buy and read your book, and then sit down at their whiteboard and say, how do I know I've landed at the real purpose statement or mission statement of this company?
Right. So it's a twofold answer to that. Any purpose, I believe, would have to have some kind of a normative component. So I'm not just doing or defining the purpose of the firm so that it resonates with my stakeholders. It also has to be, is this really what we are trying to accomplish or not? What comes from our hearts and minds as leaders and the leadership team? And then I can check to see, is this something that gets buy-in from my employees first and foremost out of all the stakeholder groups that I have? If it does, if employees seem to understand that this is what we are trying to do, it should be reasonably easy to communicate. Otherwise, purpose gets can get lost, and then it's defeated. But if it is something that's true to who you are as a company, and this is what you're really trying to do, and it has buy-in. Your employees say yes. I mean, this is a good goal for us. This is indeed why we exist as a company. Then I think you're all right. And every company does not have to, even within the same industry, every company does not have to have the exact same purpose. I mean, so the purpose of all car companies might be to provide mobility, which is in fact the basic purpose, the reason I think that they're trying to do this. But that does not mean that somebody cannot add comfort to it, or somebody else cannot add, speed or the experience, or or a rush, or whatever you call it. So there are definitely ways to kind of change your purpose to give it a certain uniqueness relative to others.
You talked about checking it with your employees as the first stakeholder group. What does that process look like? So you come up with a purpose statement and you want to see if it resonates with your employees. That's a way to test if it's the right statement for your company. What do you do?
You can do a town hall meeting, so where it's an open forum where employees come, and, you can just have a Q&A session. I've seen CEOs lead this kind of a process, and it can be quite energizing for the employees. The employees can provide feedback. It can also be done kind of at the departmental kind of level. So if the CEO and his or her leadership team have defined the purpose, they can, you have these different ambassadors who can go out to their respective kind of reports and kind of find out what people are thinking about it. The main thing is that it has to have buy-in, both externally and internally. And by gauging the energy and the resonance with what you're talking about, kind of, that's the surest way to know if you're on the right path or not.
So that one's a little art and a little science.
Yeah, all of sustainability, I think, or a lot of it is a little art and a little science. Yeah.
Excellent. So let's go into the second step where you're making your goals more concrete, was sort of how I, took that away. When it comes to social impact issues, sometimes you have blurry edges. We'll go back to your car example. It's to get people places. Is it to get them there safely? Is it to do it with the smallest, environmental footprint? Is it to do so building community? Is it to do so safely for children, pets, so on and so on? How do companies draw the right line around those sort of specific dimensions of impact so that they aren't trying to boil the ocean and target 100 impact dimensions? Because it can get really tricky to know when to say when.
Sure, that's a great question. So what companies typically do is something called a materiality analysis, which in very simple terms is kind of what do our stakeholders think are the most important issues kind of facing the company, and what do our managers think are the most important issues facing the company. And so stakeholders rate all these different issues that you talked about. Kind of, I've participated as a stakeholder in several companies' surveys in terms of their materiality surveys. And we just, from our knowledge of the industry, from the knowledge of the company, we say, okay, these kinds of things are really important. And then the company, chooses a set of employees as well to rate the same universe of issues in terms of how important is it for the company. And then the materiality matrix is simply kind of, plotting those on a two-dimensional axis, kind of, and so the importance according to the employees and the importance according to the stakeholders. Mm-hmm. And then we choose, typically the company will choose those issues which are deemed important not only by the company itself, mm-hmm. but also by the marketplace of stakeholders. And more than 3 or 4 issues can make it, or 7, let's say in the case of Unilever, it can, it can get very, very complicated. Mm-hmm. Now the question is, why is this step important? You don't want to boil the ocean, because if you don't focus on anything, this is a quote in my book, if you don't focus on something, then nothing gets done. Yeah. So, you've got to prioritize, you've got to pick. I mean, let's talk of carbon. Carbon is extremely important for, let's say, Lafarge Holcim, this large cement, the largest cement producer in the world. But it is much less important for, let's say, a company like ING Financial Services, for whom something like cybersecurity may be much more important. So the materiality is one way that we can boil down and distill our goals and into concrete bite-sized kind of chunks. And it's easier to disseminate these goals and the priorities to kind of the employee base and to the stakeholder base. I mean, think of companies like Lafarge or Unilever or IBM. They have hundreds of thousands of employees, and to get into their heads, kind of, okay, these are the 3 things that are important. that makes progress much, much easier down the road.
Absolutely, especially to consumers. I'm imagining the effort it takes for companies to say, this is what we care about. Right. You want to keep that list.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Not limitless. So then as we go to the end, and to the third step, you talk a lot about employee ownership, really getting this to be something that every single employee at the company sees as a part of their job, as a priority of theirs. You talk about the heart and the head both being necessary. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so ownership is really kind of the centerpiece, I think, of this whole thing. I mean, there are companies who are giving directives to their employees, kind of, okay, we need to be more sustainable, we need to do this, we need to do that. But what's happening if you do not go through this process of instilling this sense of ownership, then it becomes like, going to the gym because I have to go to the gym, and my heart is not in this thing. What ownership does, and psychologically, this is psychological ownership, you're not owning something physical, but what ownership does, it makes the individual employee take responsibility, for sustainability, regardless of whether he or she is in the mailroom or whether he or she is in the boardroom. Like, everybody can make a difference. And so to instill that sense of ownership, I have to make an appeal. And I call this enticing employees to kind of onboard. And it's different strokes for different folks. So the right thing to do, this is the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do for our planet. It's the right thing to do for our children. We will be extinct. I mean, all of these things are going, people are reading about it in the newspapers. So several employees will resonate with this right thing to do kind of argument. The other argument is, well, this is not only the right thing to do, but it's also the smart thing to do, because this is saving you money. So I spoke to Lisa Jackson, who's the top sustainability person at Apple, and she said that the most fun part, or one of the most fun parts of her job, is to actually go into businesses and say, look, this is not only going to save you the amount of metals you use in these products, but it's also saving you money at the same time. But it's a nicer saving because it's also helping the planet. So the head and the heart kind of work in tandem. And so therefore, companies oftentimes will use one or the other, but very often a mix of both.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about that. You said sustainable investment takes time to pay off. You will have to spend money to get your house in order, but once the returns start coming in, then there's no conflict between the sustainability and the profitability. Let's talk a little bit about that timeline, because I think this is a concept most everyone can get excited about. But often what comes into play is, how much do I need to invest and when will I see those returns? Returns in terms of profits, returns in terms of employee engagement, and environmental impact. Can you talk about what you've learned about those timelines?
Sure. Another great question. There is not, I would start by saying that there is not kind of one timeline, and it depends on the kinds of initiatives you undertake. In almost every organization I've studied, it seems like there's low-hanging fruit. And the low-hanging fruit really does not take long to fix unless you're overly bureaucratic. And the low-hanging fruit oftentimes is as well kind of, things that have high symbolic value, high signaling value, even if they are not the one that's kind of the most intense sustainability activity that you could undertake.
And what would an example be?
So an example of a low-hanging fruit would be to basically say, kind of, this is a plastic-free, a single plastic use free zone. In our office, we do not bring single plastic use bottles. We each have our respective coffee cups or mugs and water bottles and so on and so forth. And that's not that difficult to do, but it has a tremendous impact on just the employees' kind of, light bulbs going off. And hey, my company is taking this seriously. So no more. Companies go the next step and say, we will not have individual waste paper baskets in every office. You will need to go to the common area and segregate your waste into, what's recyclable, what's compostable, et cetera, et cetera. And you know what? not having your own waste paper basket actually makes you produce less waste,
Sure.
believe it or not, because
believe
people
it.
don't want to keep going.
Convenience is a huge behavior driver.
That's absolutely correct. So these initiatives can literally be done kind of, in that 3 to 6 month time
So those
frame.
are quick win.
These are
low
quick
cost,
wins.
high
Low cost,
visibility.
high visibility, quick wins. Now, then, though, if you want to change your entire procurement system, or you want to install audits at your suppliers, which you should be doing, those take a little bit longer to kind of pay off. You want to build a factory which is going to be completely modernistic and up to code and so on. That's those take a little bit longer to pay off. But it's a journey, and the most important thing is to get started. You've got to get started with something that's noticeable and kind of, becomes the cooler talk, so people congregate around the water cooler and actually start chatting about it.
With the reusable water bottles.
With the reusable water bottles, that's exactly right.
And there's a lot of snowball philosophies, and it sounds like what you've seen is that when you do get these processes implemented, they begin to start to snowball. Have you seen any cases where companies have had success jumping right to big things as their first investment and sort of making a seismic shift in how they do business and capturing that transformative energy?
Simultaneously, yes. So one company I studied was Marks and Spencer, for example, this large retail organization across the world. And they took a very deliberate stand where they said that kind of, it should not be that if we are going to open a new retail store, that someone has to decide individually kind of what kinds of lights to order and what kinds of insulation to have. He said their plan is called Plan A because there is no Plan B. So that's what it says on the thing. And I spoke to the chief sustainability officer there, and he told me that, Plan A just happens at the push of a button. I mean, it's not that somebody actually has to.
It's the default option.
It's the default option. So they've tackled some big things in the in those kinds of spaces, in the operation spaces, where actually you do save a lot of energy and and save a lot of emissions and so on. But they've also, at the same time, kind of worked with their employees to say, look, we are a retailer, so if we exist in communities, that community is not going to be happy or satisfied to know that our store is kind of, has the latest technologies, sustainable technologies kind of embedded into it. The community will actually want to see some outreach from the stores to work with them. I mean, employ disabled people in the store, or kind of help out with some charitable work or something, so that kind of there is that feeling that you are one of us. So that's one example I can give you where they're tackling kind of multiple things and at the same front.
Excellent. Doing this right sounds like a competitive advantage, right? You are getting high sort of customer engagement, high employee engagement, saving money. Are you seeing companies share what they've learned about how to be more sustainable, or are they kind of keeping it a secret sauce because it is a competitive advantage? These technologies and these processes, I mean, what a treasure trove of information, but it's also, it's a competitive landscape. So what are you seeing there?
That's also a very, very good question. It's again, I mean, it's a mix. What you see out there is a mix. I mean, there are companies that firmly believe that sustainability needs to be put in the pre-competitive space. So, that's not something we fight about. Let's fight about whose product does better in the marketplace and so on and so forth. But they will collaborate on technologies, and they will collaborate on kind of, difficult problems like deforestation. How do we solve deforestation? No one company can go it alone when it comes to that. So that's where, again, collaboration is necessary. Unilever, for example, they had a compressed can deodorant, and they made that technology open source. Enel, which is a very, very large Italian electricity company, they have made much of their technologies kind of also open to someone else. So it depends on the company. I know in the chemical industry as well, kind of there are collaborations that we don't see. It's kind of happening behind the scenes in R&D and so on and so forth, all with a view to make a host of companies sustainable at the same time. Conflict minerals issue, which came up with these digital devices where the kids in the Congo were mining these minerals and they were coming into our phones. So there was this plea to kind of clean up the supply chain. A bunch of organizations like Apple and Samsung and Nokia, they got together to clean up that supply chain. So I'm sure companies do have secrets, and they're keeping some of them to themselves to be able to play the competitive advantage game. But there's in the kind of higher consciousness of things, it's also emerging that this is germane for us all. So let's work on it together.
Excellent. Well, that's good to hear. To write this book, you conducted over 25 interviews with multinational companies.
Well over 100 interviews.
Well, over 100, 25 companies.
25 companies.
Sorry, thank you.
Yeah,
25 companies, over
Right.
100. Over 100 individuals at those companies. And what I thought was interesting is those individuals were sort of across the leadership spectrum. So you said mailroom to boardroom type of thing. Was there anything that everyone commented on? Any universal trends, no matter the sector, role, level?
Yes, that this is truly important and we must be doing something about this and it's high time and all that kind of stuff. Everybody shares that.
Was there anything that surprised you from those interviews?
Yes, of course. It's interesting that more than the interviews or the content of the interviews, what is surprising is what you learn about organizations and how they operate. Mm-hmm. So there are organizations where where they're happy to have you videotape the interview, for example, And there are organizations where you cannot even audio tape an interview. Right? Now, that says something. I don't know what it says, but it says that companies operate differently. There's a company where the CEO might come outside to greet you and kind of sit you down and so on. And there are companies where you might have to go through 3 or 4 levels of admin assistance and so on to finally get into the CEO's room. So these are things that you notice, and that's that you find kind of surprising. As well, one thing I learned is that the real stories really come out when you move away from the C-suite, which is why I always made sure that I spoke with some middle managers, and wherever possible, I visited factories and I spoke with the factory workers and I went to branch offices. And so just to see kind of, is this ownership concept that I'm proposing, this buy-in to sustainability, wholesale employee engagement, is this real, or is this something that's just kind of, in the head office? Because that happens, that head offices are more. But there's some very, very interesting kind of variations as you move across different parts of a giant company. Yeah.
Sure. Makes absolute sense. Well, as we come to the end of the interview, if someone doesn't read your book or doesn't even have time to finish watching our interview here today, what are, in a couple sentences, the main takeaways that you would like anyone who catches this interview, reads the blog post about it, what are the couple things you'd really want them to take away?
The first thing I would say is that, the cost of inaction is higher than the cost of action. I think a lot of folks don't realize that. They're not reading the scientific news that is coming out. And the second thing I would say is that, you just can always do something, whether you work at a company, whether you are the CEO of a company, whether you aspire to work for a company. All of even leaving the consumer side aside for now, just thinking about the workforce and the numbers we have in the workforce, if we can mobilize a significant portion of that workforce, we get something called the million man effect, which is kind of, together we are stronger. So I want to leave everybody with this sense that, together we are stronger, and that small actions can make a big difference. And that no action is small enough, starting from the mundane of kind of, putting the lights out to kind of figuring out perhaps a way to suck carbon out of the air, or to kind of, alternative to plastic packaging or plant-based burgers, or whatever it is, whatever is in your realm of influence, you have to do it. Being a bystander is not an option anymore. You've got to lean in and be an owner.
Yeah. Well, I don't think could be a better way to end that call to action for all of our viewers and listeners, that being a bystander is not an option. CB Bhattacharya, thank you for not being a bystander, for putting this book and your work out into the world. The book is Small Actions, Big Difference, and it is available now. CB, thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.
For more insight from Knowledge at Wharton, please visit knowledge.wharton.upenn.edu.